The time has come to get back to work on our little ornamental grill project. We have the frame completed and we have the 4 C-scrolls nearly completed. They're going to need a little bit of adjusting, but we need these little center elements, and for those I'm going to use some of this 1/4 by 1/2, same stuff we made the C-scrolls out of. So that's 6 mil by 13 mil roughly, and I have just enough of this to cut 4 3.5 inch pieces, so that's what I'm going to make them out of, and that pretty much lines up with my drawing. So 3.5 inches is about 90 millimeters, it looks like. But before we get started with that, I want to give special thanks to one of the viewers out there. Doug was paying attention to the fact that my lights in this shop are mostly temporary construction lights, which work okay, but he thought he would send some nice LED lights out. These are twin tube LED lights, 40-watt lights, energy efficient, but lots of light. Right now, looking at the grill, I don't have the light over the bench on. But if I do that, much better light for the videos too, because these are daylight temperature lights, so that actually improves the lighting for the videos. I just need to finish getting them hung up. He sent 6 of these, and so far this is the only one I've got hung up. But thanks, Doug, I really appreciate it. They're going to make work in the shop a little bit easier. But let's get back to the project. I'm going to start by cutting the other 3 pieces of this. I think I'll just do it on the bandsaw, hacksaw, angle grinder, chop saw, whatever you got works just fine. We'll cut these off and I'll meet you at the forge. Well, here's another one of those little time travel bits. I'm back from the end of the video to say that I consider this project a failure. Now, at first glance, it probably looks pretty darn good. But there are some things about this that means if this was a customer job, or if it was something that was meant for a project in my house even, that I probably wouldn't have finished it, or I would be starting over from scratch right now. There are mosquitoes in the shop. But we can go ahead and watch the video, see how I got to this point. For the most part, the techniques are still valid, the information is still good. But if you stick around to the very end of the video, we'll analyze what went wrong and explain why I don't think this is a good project, even though at first glance, it looks okay. These little elements are very simple. They just start with a point. Just something like that. I'm going to set that one aside and use it as a pattern for the others. And turn them around and make the other end match that point. When these are done, they should be perfectly symmetrical. And if you need to do a little filing or grinding on them to get them right, that's okay. The closer they are between hammer and anvil, the less filing and grinding you'll have to do. I'm going to put that in the vise just a little bit above where that taper is. Leave myself some room for the twist. Give these all a 1/4 twist, and I'm going to go counterclockwise with all of them. It's important to leave a little bit of room for the twist to actually occur, otherwise you're liable to shear it off right there. That's the basic element. I'm going to go ahead and peen this out a little bit at the anvil on all these, though, to make it a little bit more dramatic. I just want to spread that out and make kind of a spade finial sort of a thing. That's really all we need to do with each end. These will definitely need some filing. Now this one is obviously got a longer point. Got something misaligned there. We'll probably have to draw this out a little bit. Clearly this is something I should have done more test pieces and practiced a little bit before we actually did it for the project, but unfortunately this is all of the material I have, and unless I go to town and buy more material, I'm going to have to make these work. But that shouldn't be too hard. The biggest thing is that the finials are a little bit different sizes, and that's easy to correct with a file or a grinder. The other issue is there's some of these that may be a little bit shorter than others, although not bad. It looks like these two are a little short, these two are a little long. Now ideally I would like to make the long one shorter, but that requires upsetting, and trying to hammer on the ends of these to upset it is really impractical. Not going to happen as far as I'm concerned. So that means I need to draw out the others. Not going to take much. They only need to move about 1/4 of an inch to look right. But I think it will be well worth the effort to go ahead and draw those out so all of these match in length anyways, even if these end up just a little bit thinner. Then the other thing that needs to be done is file or grind all the finials until they're the same. So I'm going to go back to the forge. I'm going to stretch the two short ones, and I'm going to then go to the grinder, clean up the finials, and I'll meet you back here when that's all done, and we'll start looking at the collaring part of this project. These little bow tie elements, or whatever you want to call them, I don't know if they have an actual name, look a lot better now that they've been cleaned up some. They are ready to go into the project. The scrolls are still going to need just a little bit of tweaking and adjustment. This one's not quite even here. Most of them look pretty good, but things are a little loose in the frame, so they're going to need to pull out just a little bit. We'll probably do all that cold with bending forks. But it's time to start thinking about our collars. Now, when I do hot collars, I generally refer to Francis Whitaker's Blacksmith cookbook. This is a very simple explanation of collars, and it has always worked for me. His formula is to cut the perimeter of the material. So this is 3/4 inch material by 1/2 inch thick, and that means it's 2.5 inches all the way around the material. To that you add 2.5 times the thickness of the collar material. I'm using 1/8 inch material for these collars, so that's 5/16 of an inch more material. If you're working in metric, millimeters are probably easier to do this with. Since that's not how I'm working, it really doesn't matter. And I guess in metric, this would be something like 3 by 13 millimeter. Now, knowing that the proper length of my collars is 2 13/16, I'm just going to average that to 3 inches to prepare my material. I'll cut it to exact length after I've prepared the material, but I think it looks better if I go ahead and forge a bevel along the edges, just on one side, just on the side that's going to show. The side that's trapped up against the material should be flat. So let's go to the forge and let's put a little bevel on this. I'm just going to gently bevel the outside surface. Lots of things you can do to collar material to ornament it a little bit. You can chisel a groove down each side. You can put it in a bottom swedge to create some sort of a molding effect. But I think just a simple bevel for this project is all it needs. With our collar material beveled and now cooling so that we can handle it again, let's turn our attention back to our frame. First thing I'm concerned about is the frame square, and that means 90-degree corners, or more importantly, exactly the same measurement on the diagonals. It's an easy way to check for square as long as everything is parallel, and it is. Now the good news is that this frame is nice and square. So I don't need to worry about that. If it wasn't square, you might need to heat up the rivets, maybe put a big clamp on the long side and squeeze it in half the distance that it's out of square, because it will move both directions. So if it's a ½ inch out of square and you shorten this one 1/4 inch, this one will stretch 1/4 inch and it should be right. But then check it again and you might have to tighten the rivets. Very likely some back and forth, some fiddling, fussing, and all that kind of stuff. Just take the time to get it right. If it's just a little bit out, you might be able to stand it up on end and hit it with a rawhide mallet and make the adjustment. And while this one's square, it does have a little bit of twist to it. You can see how it rocks on here. So that means that it's twisted this direction, and we're going to need to fix that. Otherwise, it'll never sit flat on whatever you hang it on, and it's going to look really funny. On frames that aren't too big, it's not too hard to just clamp this to a bench or a heavy table. Figure out what really needs to happen. This corner needs to come up is the most important thing. And then just use a long bar for some leverage. You can clamp this to the piece, or you can do it like I'm doing here, just putting it under. If it doesn't want to move, be careful. But something like this moves pretty easy. And that is probably all we need to do. Yep, it's nice and flat now. That means the next thing to do is to go back to our scrolls and trying to decide where they need to be adjusted, if they need to be adjusted. Now, starting with one that looks like it's a little tight on one end, that's where I'll start making my adjustments. So we'll just come over here to the bending fork again. Also check your scrolls and make sure they're not twisted. This one's got a little bit of a twist in it. Now our 2 13/16 measurement is the cut length of the collar before the bevels are put on. The bevels will be put in with a grinder. And you can cut these with a hacksaw or a small shear or the portaband or whatever you want to do. And the ends are beveled, one on the front, one on the back, so they're both going the same direction. It's not like this, it's like that. And we need to find the center of this. Center finding rule's handy, but not necessary. And then half the thickness of the material. It's the 3/4 inch dimension that we're doing here, so we need to be 3/8 of an inch from that center line. And all of this is just done cold. The final fitting of the collar will be done hot. But you can do this much cold and it goes much faster. The next bend needs to go around a block. You can't get this in the vise to make the next bend. It just doesn't work. Everything's in your way. So you put a block in here that's the same thickness as the material you're going around, so 3/4 of an inch. Clamp that up solidly in the vise. And if your collar is going to overhang the edge of the block on this bend, make sure it's sticking up out of the vise, but in this case it doesn't, so it's not that big a deal. And that should give you a collar that's then ready to bend. I'm working from the back of this, so I need to shim this to get above the rivet heads. It doesn't hurt to give it a little tap. And make sure that you're actually centered in the framework here. The first thing I want to do is heat the lower edge here and give it a good squeeze in sideways. Just to make sure it's tight in that direction. And you want to make sure you put the bevel that'll be up down first. If you do this in the opposite orientation, you end up with the bevels on the wrong sides and they don't lay together nicely. Sorry that sheet metal makes so much noise. I may take that out of here for the rest of this. Now my first collar ended up just a hair short, so I made some adjustments in my measurements here to make sure the rest of these were going to be a little bit better. I've also marked center lines so I get my scrolls centered where I want them. I'm hoping that the shrinkage of the collar will take care of all this. If it's all perfect, this will be tight and it won't rattle or shake or anything else. But we won't know for sure until we're completely cool. Now this bit of the video may be a little bit choppy. The camera cards filled up and I had to delete some stuff. Then the batteries died and now they're just kind of in the way with a torch and a hammer and trying to get all this stuff done. So I'm going to turn the cameras off. I'm going to finish this. You already know each of the steps that goes into it. Everything else is just more repetition. I'll meet you back at the bench when I'm done. So I've got this completely collared together. We know some of the collars weren't quite the right length. And the mistake that I made with the collar length is that instead of forging the bevels on, I ground the bevels in. And I've frequently ground bevels in collars, but I think I've probably used a little bit different math. Francis's math that he presents in the Blacksmith cookbook definitely says to cut it the circumference of the material plus 2.5 times the thickness of the collar and then forge the bevels in. I ground them in. That meant it was too short. And that was easy enough to correct. I went and made some more collars, stretched them a little bit, and they worked okay. But the other mistake I made with the collars was right here at these center elements. I forgot to account for the fact that I had tapered these, so they're a little bit thinner right there, and that means some of these are a little bit loose. If collars are done correctly, they are very tight. They'll last for hundreds of years. No need to arc weld or do anything else to it to hold it together. Now certainly a lot of people do prefer to go to the welder at this point. They MIG weld or TIG weld a little bit at the back of this, and that holds everything in exactly the right relationship. Then they can come back and they can put the collars in. It makes your life a little bit easier to do the collars, but you're sort of admitting your collars aren't doing the job they're there for. They're just an ornamental cover-up for a weld. And I would prefer to improve my skills and become better at doing the collars than to rely on a modern weld that admits that the collars aren't doing what they're supposed to do. So this is just a practice piece. It's a test piece. It's for me to educate myself. It's not going to anybody. It might hang on the wall here. But in general, it was just meant to be educational, and I got a pretty good education out of it. And hopefully, you watching some of my mistakes, you can get a better education. So what other mistakes are there? Well, for one, my scrolls are not perfect, and that meant it was a little bit hard to get everything to line up just right. And that's another reason this one's loose. I just couldn't get everything sucked in. The other elements where they were tight together are tight enough that they're going to stay put. It's just this one that's loose. And again, you could put a little bit of a weld on the back of it. Probably nobody else would ever know. But on my work, I'd know, and then I'd have a problem with that. The other issue that I have with this is simply that these things should be in a straight line from corner through the element, through the next element, into the other corner. And these things are just drunken. This one's not terrible, but this one is really awful. Going this way, they're much better. I can live with those, but this one is so bad. It could probably be heated with a torch. You can heat this scroll up and this scroll up, put a little bit of a twist in there, and I might still go ahead and do that. But again, it's just dealing with mistakes instead of getting it right in the first place. Other than that, I do kind of like the design. I like the general idea. I might do another one of these, but that's why you do practice pieces. You practice these techniques without it needing to go anywhere, and you learn things from it. So as far as a learning exercise, this was a complete success. As far as a finished project, yeah, not so much. But anyways, I learned something from this video. I hope you learned something from the video as well. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, I would love it if you hit that subscribe button. Stick around, watch a few of the other videos. Feel free to share the videos with your friends, but then make time in your day to get out to your shop, make something, even if it's just for practice. But stay safe, wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next one.